The town of Red Rock sat like a forgotten scar on the edge of the New Mexico desert, where the red mountains bled into endless stretches of sand and sage. In the summer of 1883, the heat pressed down on the scattered buildings like an iron hand, and the wind carried nothing but dust and the occasional tumbleweed through the empty streets. Silas Boone stood at the window of his ranch house, watching the sun sink behind the jagged peaks. His weathered hands gripped a cup of cold coffee, forgotten since morning. The house behind him echoed with silence, the kind that settles into a place after death has visited and decided to stay. 3 months. It had been 3 months since the fire took Margaret. 3 months since he'd found her body in the kitchen, the kerosene lamp overturned, the flames already too fierce to fight. The townspeople whispered their theories when they thought he couldn't hear. Some said it was an accident, a moment's carelessness with the lamp. Others, with crueler tongues, suggested darker possibilities, that Silas himself had set the blaze in a fit of rage, that their marriage had been troubled, that he'd wanted to be free. He let them talk. Words couldn't hurt him any more than the emptiness already did. In town, at Garrett's saloon, a different conversation was taking place. 4 men sat around a scarred wooden table, their faces flushed with whiskey and conspiracy. "The man's going to waste away out there," said Tom Garrett, the saloon owner, a thick-set man with graying whiskers. "Can't have a good cowhand turning into a hermit. Bad for business, bad for the town. He ain't been the same since Margaret died," added Pete Coleman, the blacksmith. "Won't come to town except for supplies. Won't talk to nobody. It ain't natural." James McKinnon, who ran the general store, leaned forward with a gleam in his eye. "I got a letter yesterday from back east. A woman looking to come west. Wants to be a mail-order bride. Says she's got nowhere else to go." The 4th man, Doc Harrison, frowned over his spectacles. "You thinking what I think you're thinking?" "Why not?" McKinnon grinned. "Send her Silas's way. Either it'll snap him out of this funk, or he'll send her packing. Either way, it'll be entertainment for the town." "That's a cruel joke to play on a grieving man," the doctor said quietly. "Cruel?" Tom Garrett snorted. "We're doing him a favor. Man needs a woman to cook, clean, keep him human. Besides, what's the worst that could happen? She takes one look at him and gets back on the next stage." They didn't know that Clara Whitmore, sitting in a boarding house in Kansas City, had already made up her mind. The letter from the matrimonial agency had seemed like salvation. A rancher in New Mexico, seeking a wife. No mention of recent widowhood. No hint of the tragedy that waited. Clara folded the acceptance letter carefully, her hands trembling slightly. At 25, she was already considered past her prime, especially after William Hartley had abandoned her at the altar 6 months ago. The rumors had spread like wildfire through Kansas City society. Whispers that she wasn't pure, that there had been indiscretions. None of it true. But truth rarely mattered when scandal was more interesting. Her family had turned their backs, her father declaring he had no daughter who could bring such shame to their name. With her savings nearly gone and her options dwindling, the advertisement had seemed like a gift from Providence. She packed her few belongings, 2 dresses, her mother's Bible, a silver hairbrush that had been her grandmother's. Everything she owned fit into a single trunk. As she looked around the shabby room one last time, Clara squared her shoulders. Whatever waited in Red Rock, it had to be better than the slow death of reputation and poverty in Kansas City. The journey took 2 weeks. First by train to Albuquerque, then by stage through increasingly desolate country. Clara watched the landscape change from green plains to brown scrubland to red desert, each mile taking her further from everything familiar. The other passengers, a mining engineer and a traveling preacher, eventually stopped trying to make conversation with the quiet young woman who stared out the window with determined eyes. When the stage finally rolled into Red Rock, Clara's first thought was that there must be some mistake. The town was smaller than she'd imagined. Just a main street with a handful of buildings clinging to it like survivors of some catastrophe. The late afternoon sun painted everything the color of dried blood. She stepped down from the stage, her traveling dress dusty and wrinkled, and looked for someone who might be Silas Boone. The few people on the street stared at her with undisguised curiosity. A woman traveling alone was unusual. A woman arriving as a mail-order bride was gossip fodder for months. At the post office, the clerk, McKinnon himself, barely suppressed a smirk as he directed her to wait. "Mr. Boone comes in regular-like for his mail. Should be along any minute now." Clara sat on the bench outside, her trunk at her feet, trying to calm her nerves. She'd built an image in her mind of her future husband, perhaps a lonely rancher who'd never married, or a widower with children who needed a mother. Someone kind, she hoped. Someone who wouldn't care about the rumors that had driven her from Kansas City. When Silas Boone finally appeared, leading his horse down the main street, Clara knew immediately it was him. Not from any description, there had been precious little in the correspondence, but from the way people stepped aside, the way conversations died as he passed. He moved like a man walking through a dream, or perhaps a nightmare. He was taller than she'd expected, lean and hard from years of ranch work, with dark hair that needed cutting and a beard that hadn't seen a razor in weeks. But it was his eyes that made her breath catch, gray as winter sky and utterly empty. Silas stopped short when he saw her sitting there, a woman in traveling clothes with a trunk that marked her as staying, not passing through. For a long moment, they simply looked at each other. Clara saw confusion flicker across his face, then understanding, then something that might have been anger. "You're the bride," he said flatly, not a question. Clara stood, smoothing her skirts with nervous hands. "Mr. Boone, I'm Clara Whitmore, from Kansas City. The agency said—" "I didn't send for any bride." The words fell between them like stones into still water. Clara felt the blood drain from her face. "But the letter, the matrimonial agency said you were seeking a wife." Silas turned to look at McKinnon, who had emerged from the post office to watch the show. Understanding dawned in those gray eyes, followed by a fury so cold it made Clara step back. "Get in the wagon," he said quietly. "I don't understand. Get in the wagon. Miss Whitmore, unless you prefer to be the evening's entertainment for these good folks." Clara looked around and saw the truth of it. Faces in windows, people finding reasons to linger nearby. She was already the subject of speculation and amusement, with as much dignity as she could muster. She climbed into the wagon while Silas loaded her trunk with mechanical efficiency. They rode out of town in silence, the wheels churning up dust that hung in the air like a veil between them and the watching eyes of Red Rock. Clara gripped the edge of the seat, stealing glances at the stern profile of the man beside her. This was not how she'd imagined her arrival. This was not how any of it was supposed to be. The ranch, when they finally reached it, was a lonely cluster of buildings against the vast expanse of desert and mountain. The main house was solid enough, built of adobe and timber, but there was an air of neglect about the place, fences that needed mending, a garden gone to seed. Silas stopped the wagon but didn't help her down. "There's been a mistake," he said, still not looking at her. "Those fools in town thought they were doing me a kindness. They weren't. You can sleep in the house tonight. Tomorrow I'll take you back to catch the stage." "I have nowhere to go back to," Clara said quietly. That made him look at her, really look at her for the first time. She saw him take in her worn dress, the careful mending, the trunk that held everything she owned in the world. Something flickered in those empty eyes. Perhaps pity, perhaps understanding. "That's not my problem, Miss Whitmore." He unhitched the horses and led them to the barn without another word, leaving Clara standing alone in the gathering dusk. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of sage and something else, old smoke, maybe, or just the smell of loneliness itself. She carried her trunk into the house, finding it dark and musty. The furniture was good quality but covered in dust. In the kitchen, she could see the new boards where part of the floor had been replaced, the walls where fresh plaster covered what must have been fire damage. This was where it happened. Then, this was where his wife had died. Clara found a bedroom that looked unused and set her trunk down. Through the window, she could see Silas moving around the barn, a solitary figure against the darkening sky. She'd traveled 2,000 miles to marry a stranger, only to discover she was an unwitting player in someone's cruel joke. But as she unpinned her hair and prepared for whatever tomorrow would bring, Clara made a decision. She'd been driven from one home by scandal and lies. She wouldn't be driven from another without a fight. Silas Boone might not want a wife, but he had one now, at least for tonight, and Clara Whitmore had survived worse things than an angry widower and a town full of gossips. Outside, the desert wind howled through the canyons, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote called to its mate. The sound was lonely and wild and strangely beautiful. Like everything else in this hard country, she'd have to learn to call home, whether for one night or forever. Clara woke to the sound of a door slamming. The morning light filtering through the dusty curtains told her she'd overslept, exhausted from the journey and the shock of her reception. She dressed quickly in her second-best dress, a practical gray cotton that had seen better days, and ventured into the main part of the house. The kitchen was empty, but fresh coffee sat on the stove, still warm. Through the window, she could see Silas already at work, repairing a section of fence near the barn. She poured herself a cup and nearly dropped it when she noticed the calendar on the wall. Today's date was circled in black ink, and someone, a woman's hand, surely had written "Our anniversary" in careful script. Understanding hit her like a physical blow. She'd arrived on their wedding anniversary. No, worse than that, counting back 3 months from what Silas had said about the fire. She realized with growing horror that she'd arrived on the anniversary of his wife's death. The front door opened and Silas entered, stopping short when he saw her in the kitchen. His clothes were already dusty from the morning's work, and sweat had traced lines through the dirt on his face. "You're still here," he said, neither surprised nor pleased. "You said you'd take me back to town today." Clara kept her voice steady, though her hands trembled slightly around the coffee cup. "I'll be ready whenever you are." He moved past her to pour his own coffee, and she caught the scent of him, leather and sweat and something sharper, like pain given form. "Stage doesn't come through till Thursday. That's 3 days from now. Then I'll wait in town." "No." The word was final. "I won't give them the satisfaction. You'll stay here till then. There's food in the pantry, water in the well. Keep to yourself and we'll manage." He turned to leave, but Clara found herself speaking. "I didn't know. About your wife. About today. If I had known, you wouldn't have come." His laugh was bitter. "Of course you wouldn't. What woman would want to walk into this?" He gestured around the kitchen, and Clara saw what he meant. Everything was exactly as a woman would have left it. Dishes stacked just so. Dish towels folded precisely. Even a half-finished shopping list on the counter in that same careful handwriting. It was a shrine to someone who would never return. "I'm sorry," she said quietly, "for your loss, for intruding, for all of it." Something in her tone made him pause. He looked at her, really looked at her, and perhaps saw not the mail-order bride, but a woman who understood loss. "Just stay out of the main bedroom, and don't touch her things." He left without waiting for a response, the door closing behind him with a finality that echoed through the empty house. Clara spent the morning exploring her temporary prison. The house was well built and had once been lovingly maintained. She found evidence of the former Mrs. Boone everywhere, embroidered samplers on the walls, pressed flowers in frames, a sewing basket with a half-finished quilt in what must have been the parlor. A photograph held pride of place on the mantel, a younger Silas standing beside a pretty woman with kind eyes and a gentle smile. They looked happy. They looked like everything Clara had hoped to find in her own marriage. The main bedroom door stood slightly ajar, and despite Silas's warning, or perhaps because of it, Clara peered inside. The room was untouched, frozen in time. A dress hung on the wardrobe door. as if Margaret Boone might return any moment to put it on. The bed was made with military precision, and on the nightstand sat a pair of reading glasses and a book, its page still marked. Clara backed away, feeling like an intruder in a grief too private for witnessing. She busied herself with small tasks, dusting the parlor, washing the accumulated dishes, sweeping the floors. It wasn't her house, and she had no right, but idleness would drive her mad. As she worked, she tried not to think about what would happen in 3 days. Where would she go? Her savings were nearly gone, spent on the journey here. She had no references, no connections, no family who would take her back. The sun was high when she ventured outside to find the well. The ranch stretched out around her, beautiful in its desolation. She could see why someone would choose to build a life here, away from the judgment and gossip of town society. The mountains rose like sentinels in the distance, and the sky seemed endless. She found Silas working with a horse in the corral, his movements patient and sure despite the animal's skittishness. He had a gentleness with the creature that seemed at odds with his harsh demeanor toward her. When the horse finally accepted the bridle, Silas stroked its neck and murmured something too low for her to hear. "You're good with horses," she called out, immediately regretting the intrusion when he stiffened. "They're honest," he replied without turning. "They don't pretend to be something they're not." The accusation stung, though she wasn't sure it was meant for her or the town conspirators. "Neither do I. Mr. Boone, I came here in good faith, seeking an honest marriage. I won't apologize for that." He turned then, studying her with those gray eyes that seemed to see too much. "Why? Pretty woman like you, there must have been options back east." Clara felt heat rise in her cheeks. "There were circumstances, rumors, lies. But once they start, the truth doesn't much matter." "No," he agreed quietly. "It doesn't." They stood there in the afternoon sun, two people who understood how quickly a life could be destroyed by whispers and flames. Then Silas turned back to his horse, the moment of connection severed. That evening, Clara cooked a simple meal from what she found in the pantry, beans and cornbread. Nothing fancy. She set 2 places without thinking, then wondered if she should eat alone. But Silas came in as the sun set, washed his hands at the pump, and sat down without comment. They ate in silence for a while before he said, "You can cook. My mother taught me. She said a woman should know how to make something from nothing. Margaret couldn't cook worth a damn when we married." The words seemed to surprise him, as if they'd escaped without permission. "Took her years to learn. Used to burn everything." It was the first time he'd said his wife's name, and Clara saw how much it cost him. "How long were you married?" 8 years. He pushed beans around his plate. "She was 17 when we met. I was 23. Thought I knew everything about the world. She taught me different. She was fortunate to be so loved," Clara said softly. Silas's fork clattered against his plate. "Fortunate? She died because of me, because I brought her to this godforsaken place, because I wasn't there when—" He stopped, breathing hard. "Don't talk about things you don't understand." He left the table, retreating to the barn. Clara heard a bottle being uncorked, heard his footsteps pacing. Later, much later, she heard him return to the house, his steps unsteady. He went to the main bedroom and closed the door. Through the thin walls, she heard him talking, a low, broken monologue punctuated by sobs. She caught fragments. Margaret, and sorry, and the baby, and should have been there. Clara pulled a pillow over her head, trying to give him privacy even in her hearing. But the sound of a grown man crying like that was terrible to endure. She understood now the depth of what she'd walked into. This wasn't just grief for a wife. This was guilt, self-hatred, a man drowning in what-ifs and might-have-beens, and she'd arrived on the very day it had happened, a living reminder of everything he'd lost. The next morning, Silas emerged looking haggard, avoiding her eyes. He mumbled something about checking the eastern pastures and rode out before she could offer breakfast. Clara watched him go. a solitary figure against the vast landscape, and wondered if he'd ever find his way back from the wilderness of his grief. She spent the day organizing the pantry and tending the neglected garden, coaxing life from plants that had been abandoned but not yet given up. As she worked, she thought about the cruel joke the townsmen had played, on both of them. They'd sent her here thinking to shock Silas back to life, but all they'd done was deepen his wounds and entangle her in a tragedy she couldn't fix. That night, as she lay in the narrow bed listening to coyotes calling across the desert, Clara made a decision. She had 2 more days before the stage came. 2 days to try to bring some small comfort to a man who'd shown her unexpected glimpses of kindness beneath his pain. She couldn't be his wife, couldn't replace what he'd lost, but maybe she could leave this place a little better than she'd found it. It wasn't much, but it was all she had to offer, one broken soul to another, in a land that seemed to specialize in breaking things. The morning of her 3rd day at the ranch, Clara rose before dawn. She'd grown accustomed to the rhythms of this lonely place, the way the roosters crowed just as the eastern sky began to pale, the sound of Silas moving about in the pre-dawn darkness, preparing for another day of self-imposed isolation. She made coffee strong and black, the way she'd observed he preferred it, and was frying eggs when he entered the kitchen. He stopped in the doorway, clearly unprepared for this domestic scene. "You don't need to do that," he said gruffly. "I need to eat. Seemed foolish to cook for one." She kept her tone matter-of-fact, placing a plate on the table without meeting his eyes. "Besides, tomorrow I'll be gone. Consider it payment for the shelter." He sat down slowly, as if the chair might break beneath him. They ate in their customary silence, but Clara noticed he cleaned his plate for the first time since she'd arrived. After breakfast, she ventured to the nearest neighbor, if a ranch 5 miles away could be called near. She'd seen chimney smoke in the distance and decided to walk, needing information and perhaps a bit of human kindness. The Hartley ranch was smaller but better tended, with children's toys scattered in the yard and wash hanging on the line. A woman near Clara's age answered her knock, flour dusting her hands and surprise widening her eyes. "Lord have mercy," the woman breathed. "You must be the mail-order bride. Everyone in town's been talking." "Clara Whitmore," Clara said, extending her hand. "And you are?" "Ruth Hartley. Come in, come in. You look like you could use some coffee and friendly conversation." Over coffee and fresh bread, Clara learned more about the tragedy that had shaped Silas Boone. Ruth was a natural talker, eager for female companionship, and the story spilled out in sympathetic whispers. "Margaret was the sweetest thing," Ruth said, refilling Clara's cup. "Came from back east like you, though her family had money. Could have married anyone, but she fell for Silas the moment she saw him. He was different then, used to smile, even laugh sometimes." "What happened the night she died?" Clara asked carefully. Ruth's face darkened. "Nobody knows for certain. Silas had gone to help the Millers with a difficult calving. They'd sent their boy over, desperate for help. Margaret was alone, about 6 months along with their first child. Near as anyone can figure, she was in the kitchen when the lamp fell. Maybe she knocked it reaching for something. Maybe the table leg gave way. The whole kitchen went up before anyone could get there. How horrible," Clara murmured, thinking of that bright, happy woman in the photograph. "Silas rode home to find half the town trying to put out the flames. They say he tried to go in after her. Took 3 men to hold him back. By then it was too late. The doctor said the smoke probably took her quick. Her and the baby both. Small mercy, I suppose." Ruth leaned forward, lowering her voice. "Some folks whisper uglier things, but don't you believe them. Silas Boone loved his wife more than life itself. What happened was a tragedy. Plain and simple, but guilt doesn't listen to reason, does it?" As Clara walked back to the ranch, she pondered Ruth's words. The landscape seemed less hostile now, more sorrowful, a place holding too many memories for one man to bear alone. She found Silas repairing harnesses in the barn, his movements methodical and precise. Without thinking, She picked up a broken piece and began working the leather, a skill learned from her grandfather years ago. "You know leather work?" He sounded surprised. "My grandfather was a saddler. I used to help in his shop." She kept her eyes on the work, finding comfort in the familiar motions. He said working with your hands helped quiet the mind. They worked in companionable silence for a while, the afternoon sun slanting through the barn doors. Clara became aware of his proximity, the controlled strength in his hands, the way he occasionally glanced at her when he thought she wasn't looking. "Why did you really come west?" he asked suddenly. "The truth this time." Clara's hands stilled. "I told you. Rumors. Lies." "About what?" She took a breath. "I was engaged. William Hartley, no relation to your neighbors. The wedding was planned, the church decorated. Then, the morning of the ceremony, his cousin arrived from Chicago. She told him things. Said she'd seen me coming from a hotel room with a traveling salesman. Said I'd been compromised." "And had you?" "No." The word came out fierce. "I'd never even met the man she described. But William believed her. Or maybe he was looking for an excuse. I'll never know. He called off the wedding an hour before the ceremony. The scandal was considerable." Silas studied her face, perhaps recognizing the truth there. His cousin lied. She wanted William for herself. Married him 3 months later. I heard. Clara resumed her work, pulling the leather tight. "My family couldn't bear the shame. Said I must have done something to invite such accusations. So I answered an advertisement for a mail-order bride, thinking I could start fresh somewhere no one knew my name. Instead, you walked into another scandal. It seems to be my talent." She attempted a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. That evening brought unseasonable rain, sudden and violent as everything in this country seemed to be. Clara had just finished preparing dinner when the sky opened up, turning the yard to mud within minutes. She heard the barn door bang in the wind and saw Silas struggling to secure it while managing a spooked horse. Without thinking, she grabbed a slicker from the hook by the door and ran out to help. The rain hit like cold bullets, soaking through her dress immediately. Together they got the horse into its stall and fought to close the barn door against the wind. Inside, they stood dripping and breathless. The temperature had dropped 20 degrees, and Clara found herself shivering violently. In the dim light, she saw Silas looking at her strangely, and realized her soaked dress clung to her form in a way that would be considered improper anywhere, let alone in a barn with a man who wasn't her husband. She crossed her arms over her chest, backing away. "I should—" Lightning struck nearby, the thunder following instantly. Clara couldn't help her startled cry, and suddenly Silas's hand was on her arm, steadying her. "Just thunder," he said quietly. "We need to wait it out. Can't cross the yard in this." They were standing too close. Clara could see the rain droplets on his eyelashes, could smell the wet leather and soap scent of him. His hand was warm through her soaked sleeve, and she realized it was the first time he'd voluntarily touched her. The moment stretched between them, charged as the air before lightning. Then Silas seemed to remember himself, dropping her arm as if it burned him. He stepped back so quickly he nearly stumbled. "There are horse blankets," he said roughly. "You should. You need to get warm." He turned away while she wrapped herself in a scratchy but dry blanket. They sat on hay bales, far apart, watching the storm rage through the open hayloft door. Clara's teeth chattered despite the blanket, and she saw Silas clench his fists as if fighting the urge to offer comfort. "Margaret was afraid of storms," he said suddenly. "Used to hide under the quilts like a child. I'd hold her until it passed, tell her stories about when I was young. Anything to distract her. She was lucky to have someone who cared for her fears," Clara said softly. "I wasn't here the night she died." The words came out raw. She must have been so frightened, alone with the storm coming in. The lamp probably fell when she startled at thunder. If I'd been here. You were helping neighbors. You couldn't know. I should have known." He stood abruptly, pacing like a caged animal. "She told me that morning she felt poorly, asked me to stay home, but the Millers needed help, and I thought, I thought she was just being fanciful about the baby. I chose them over her, and she died alone and afraid because of it. Clara rose too, the blanket clutched around her. You made a choice to help people in need. That's not a sin. Silas, what happened was a tragic accident, not God's punishment for your kindness. He turned on her then, eyes wild. What do you know about it? You've been here 3 days. You didn't know her, didn't see what I've seen, didn't— No, I didn't. Clara met his anguish with steady calm. But I know guilt when I see it. I know what it's like to replay moments, wondering if one different choice would have changed everything. I know the weight of other people's judgments and my own harsh verdict on myself. And I know Margaret wouldn't want this for you. Don't! His voice broke on the word. Don't you dare speak for her. Then you speak for her. Tell me, would the woman who loved you want you to die slowly of grief and guilt? Would she want you to punish yourself forever for choosing to help others? The fight went out of him all at once. He sank onto the hay bale, head in his hands. I see her everywhere, smell her perfume in the house, hear her humming in the kitchen. Sometimes I forget she's gone and call out to her, and the silence that answers. He looked up at Clara. Lost. How do I live with that silence? Clara knelt before him, careful not to touch but close enough that he could feel her presence. One day at a time, one breath at a time, you honor her memory by living, not by dying alongside her. The storm was beginning to pass, the thunder growing distant. In the relative quiet, they could hear rain pattering on the roof, a somehow peaceful sound after the violence of the storm. Tomorrow you leave, Silas said finally. Yes. Maybe that's best, this place. It's no good for anyone now. Clara wanted to argue, to tell him about the garden already showing new growth, the horses that responded to his gentle hands, the land itself waiting patiently for him to remember it needed tending. But she simply nodded, understanding that some truths couldn't be forced. When the rain finally stopped, they made their way back to the house in silence. Clara changed into dry clothes, aware that her remaining time here could be measured in hours, as she prepared for her last night in this house of grief and ghosts. She found herself praying, not for a miracle that would let her stay, but for the man down the hall who talked to his dead wife in the darkness, asking for a forgiveness that only he could grant. The Thursday morning stage was late. Clara stood outside the general store with her trunk, trying to ignore the stares and whispers of the townspeople who had gathered to witness her departure. Silas had brought her to town at dawn, deposited her and her belongings without a word, and disappeared into the saloon at 7 in the morning. Well, the bride's leaving already. Mrs. Abigail Pemberton, the mayor's wife and Red Rock's self-appointed moral guardian, approached with 2 other women in tow. Can't say I'm surprised. Silas Boone isn't fit company for a decent woman. Clara straightened her spine. Mr. Boone is a grieving man who deserves compassion, not gossip. Compassion? Mrs. Pemberton's laugh was sharp. For a man who likely murdered his wife. My dear, you're either naive or foolish. That's a horrible thing to say, Clara said coldly. His wife died in an accident. Did she? Convenient that he was gone that night. Convenient that she died just when she was getting heavy with child, becoming a burden. The woman leaned in, her voice dropping to a theatrical whisper. Margaret told me herself she was thinking of leaving. Said Silas had changed, become distant and cold. A week later, she was dead. Clara felt anger rise in her chest. You're spreading lies about a man who can't defend himself. And a woman who can't speak for herself. Have you no shame? The women gasped at her directness. In Kansas City, Clara had always held her tongue, too conscious of her precarious social position. But here, with nothing left to lose, she found her voice. Listen here, Mrs. Boone. Clara interrupted, surprising herself. I'm his wife, legal and proper, whether you like it or not. And I won't stand here listening to you slander good people. She turned her back on the sputtering women, her heart racing. It was a lie, of course. She wasn't truly Silas's wife. But defending him felt right, necessary even. That was something to see. A man's voice, amused and appreciative. Clara turned to find a well-dressed gentleman watching her, touching his hat brim politely. "Thomas Ashford, at your service. I run the bank." "Mr. Ashford." Clara nodded warily, unused to kindness from strangers in this town. "Don't mind Abigail Pemberton. She's had her eye on the Boone Ranch since Margaret passed, wants her son to buy it cheap when Silas finally gives up." He studied Clara with intelligent eyes. "You're not what I expected when I heard about McKinnon's scheme. You knew. Everyone knew. I'm afraid. Shameful business, bringing you here under false pretenses." He paused. "Though perhaps not entirely false. Silas does need someone, whether he knows it or not." Before Clara could respond, a commotion erupted from the saloon. Raised voices, the crash of breaking glass. Then Silas burst through the doors with 2 men on his heels. His shirt was torn, his lip bleeding. "You shut your filthy mouth about my wife!" Silas roared, turning to face his pursuers. One of the men, whom Clara recognized as Jake Morrison from the livery stable, spat tobacco juice at Silas's feet. "Just saying what everyone's thinking. Boone! Margaret got what she deserved, carrying another man's bastard." The words had barely left his mouth when Silas's fist connected with his jaw. Morrison went down hard, but his companion, a rough-looking drifter, pulled a knife. "Silas!" Clara's scream carried across the street. Everything happened quickly then. Silas dodged the knife thrust, but the blade caught his arm, blood immediately soaking his sleeve. He grabbed the drifter's wrist, and they grappled in the dust while the crowd gathered, some cheering, most just watching with avid interest. Clara couldn't stand it. She pushed through the crowd and grabbed a bucket of water from the horse trough, dumping it over both men. They separated, sputtering. "Enough!" she shouted. "What kind of men are you, brawling in the street like animals? And you," she pointed at Morrison, who was struggling to his feet, "spreading vicious lies about a woman who can't defend herself. You should be ashamed." "Clara." Silas's voice was rough. He swayed on his feet, blood dripping from his arm. "Get back." "I will not." She moved to his side, pulling her handkerchief to press against the wound. "We're leaving. Now." She looked around at the gathered crowd, meeting each pair of eyes. "Is this what passes for Christianity in Red Rock? Kicking a man when he's down? Spreading poison about the dead? You sent for me as a joke, to torment a grieving man. And now you stand here enjoying his pain like it's a circus show. Shame on all of you." In the silence that followed, she helped Silas to the wagon. His horse was tied to the back, and she climbed into the driver's seat. "You can't drive," he protested weakly. "Watch me." She'd learned from her grandfather, though it had been years. The reins felt foreign in her hands, but anger gave her confidence. "Mr. Ashford, would you be kind enough to load my trunk?" The banker complied with something like admiration in his eyes. As Clara turned the wagon toward the ranch, she heard him address the crowd. "Show's over, folks, and Jake Morrison. If I hear you spreading those lies again, I'll call in your loan. Margaret Boone was a faithful wife, and anyone who says otherwise will answer to me." The ride back to the ranch was silent except for Silas's harsh breathing. Clara focused on the road, trying not to think about what she'd just done. She'd missed the stage, defended a man who wasn't really her husband, and now she was taking him home to tend wounds earned defending his late wife's honor. Her mother would be scandalized. At the ranch, she helped him inside and to the kitchen table. The knife wound was long, but not deep. Thank God. She found Margaret's sewing basket and the bottle of whiskey Silas kept in the pantry. "This will hurt," she warned, pouring whiskey over the wound. He hissed through his teeth but didn't pull away. "Why did you do that? Why defend her? You didn't even know her." "Because it was right." Clara threaded a needle with steady hands. "Because those people were wrong. Because you would have killed that man if I hadn't intervened. And you don't need that on your conscience, too." She began stitching the wound closed, trying to be gentle. His muscles tensed under her touch, but he remained still. "Morrison's been spreading that filth for weeks," Silas said quietly. "That she betrayed me, that the baby wasn't mine, I've ignored it. But today, he said she got what she deserved. The baby was yours, Clara said. It wasn't a question. Of course it was. Margaret she would never. His voice broke. She loved me. God knows why. But she did. Clara tied off the last stitch and bandaged the wound carefully. She loved you because you're a good man. Silas Boone, a man who helps neighbors in need, who tends animals with gentleness, who loves deeply and grieves just as deep. Don't let their poison make you doubt what you had. She became aware that her hands were still on his arm, that they were sitting closer than propriety allowed. The afternoon sun slanted through the window, highlighting the silver threads in his dark hair. The lines pain had carved around his eyes. You missed your stage, he said. Yes, the next one's not for a week. I know. Clara. He lifted his uninjured hand as if to touch her face, then let it fall. You should have gone. This place, these people, me, will only drag you down. I've been dragged down before, she said softly. I survived. So will you. He stood abruptly, swaying slightly. I need to check the horses. You need to rest. You lost blood, and I need to get away from you. The words came out harsh, desperate. Don't you understand? When you defended her, when you stood there fierce as a wildcat telling off the whole town. For a moment I forgot she was gone, forgot you weren't. He stopped, breathing hard. I can't do this, can't feel this, not with her barely cold in the ground. I'm not asking you to feel anything, Clara said, though her heart was racing. I'm just asking you to let me help, as a friend, nothing more. Friend. He laughed bitterly. I watched you today. Saw you drive that wagon like you were born to it. Saw you stand up to those hypocrites without flinching. You're magnificent. Clara Whitmore. And that's the problem. Because I'm noticing things I shouldn't notice. Feeling things I have no right to feel. And Margaret would want you to live. Clara finished. Would want you to find happiness again. In time. You don't know that. I know she loved you. And love, real love, wants the beloved to be whole again, even after death. Silas looked at her for a long moment, his gray eyes turbulent with emotion. Then he turned and walked out, leaving her alone with bloodied water and the echo of words that had revealed too much. That night, Clara lay awake thinking about the choice before her. She could wait for the next stage, leave this place and its complicated griefs behind. Or she could stay and fight, for Silas, for the ranch, for the possibility of something growing from the ashes of tragedy. She thought of Margaret Boone, the woman she'd never met but had defended like a sister. What would she want for the man she'd loved? Outside, a wolf howled at the moon. And somewhere in the darkness, Clara heard Silas pacing the porch, wrestling with his own demons. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new choices. But tonight, she allowed herself to admit what she'd known since that moment in the barn. She was already half in love with a man who might never be able to love her back. It was foolish, probably doomed, certainly improper. But then, when had her life ever followed the proper path? At least here, in this wild and wounded place. She could be herself, fierce and tender, proper and improper, exactly as complicated as the situation demanded. Clara packed her trunk slowly, folding each dress with deliberate care. A week had passed since the fight in town, a week of careful distance between her and Silas. He'd been polite but remote, speaking only when necessary, taking his meals alone more often than not. The wound on his arm was healing well, but the wound in his heart seemed to have reopened. Today the stage would come, and she would leave. It was what they both claimed to want. She carried her trunk to the porch as the sun climbed over the mountains. Silas had already hitched the wagon, standing beside it with his hat pulled low. Neither spoke during the ride to town. The silence felt heavier than before, weighted with things unsaid. At the stage depot, Clara saw the usual gathering of townspeople, eager for drama. She held her head high, determined to leave with dignity intact. Silas set her trunk on the platform and stepped back, his face unreadable. "Thank you," she said formally. "For the shelter, for everything." He nodded, started to turn away, then stopped. "Clara, Whatever he meant to say died unspoken. He touched his hat brim and walked back to the wagon. The stage rolled in, dusty and loud. The driver began loading luggage while passengers stretched their legs. Clara picked up her carpet bag, took one last look at the man who'd shown her glimpses of tenderness beneath his grief, and stepped toward her future. "Clara! Miss Clara! Wait!" She turned to see Ruth Hartley running down the street, skirts hiked up, face flushed with exertion. "Thank the Lord I caught you. You can't leave, not now." "Ruth, what?" "There's been trouble at your place. Rustlers hit the Boone Ranch last night after Silas left, took nearly half his cattle, burned the barn. Tom and some others rode out to help, but—" She grabbed Clara's hands. "He's hurt bad. Clara, real bad." The carpetbag slipped from Clara's numb fingers. "Where is he?" "Doc Harrison's. But Clara, it doesn't look good. He was shot trying to stop them." Clara ran. She heard Silas's wagon was still there, grabbed the reins, and drove recklessly through town to the doctor's house. People scattered from her path, shouting protests she didn't hear. She burst through the doctor's door to find several men in the front room, hats in hand, faces grim. Through the doorway to the surgery, she could see Silas on the table, his shirt soaked with blood. "You can't be in here, miss," someone said, trying to block her path. "I'm his wife," she said fiercely, pushing past. Doc Harrison looked up from his work, spectacles splattered with blood. "Mrs. Boone, I'm doing what I can, but the bullet's deep, close to the lung. He's lost a lot of blood." Clara moved to the table, taking in the pallor of Silas's face, the shallow rise and fall of his chest. His eyes were closed, dark lashes stark against white skin. "Silas!" She took his hand, shocked by how cold it was. "Silas, you stubborn fool! Don't you dare die on me!" His eyes fluttered open, gray and clouded with pain. "Clara, thought you left. I'm here." She squeezed his hand, fighting tears. "I'm not going anywhere. The ranch," his voice was barely a whisper. "They burned. Everything Margaret—" "Shh, don't worry about that now. No, you don't. Understand. Her garden, her rose bush, the one I planted. When we married, it's gone. All of it. Gone." The doctor worked steadily, extracting the bullet with careful precision. Silas's hand tightened on Clara's as pain racked his body, but he never cried out. She talked to him. Nonsense, mostly. About anything she could think of. Her grandfather's shop, the flowers she'd plant come spring, the foal she'd seen in the pasture that morning. "There," Doc Harrison said finally, dropping the bullet into a metal pan. "Got it. Now we wait and pray." They moved Silas to a bed in the back room. Clara refused to leave, settling into a chair beside him. The men filed out quietly, but she heard their whispers. Rustlers had been plaguing the territory, growing bolder. The Boone Ranch was just the latest target. Night fell. Silas drifted in and out of consciousness, sometimes lucid, sometimes delirious with fever. In his delirium, he called for Margaret, apologizing over and over for not being there, for failing her. Clara held his hand through it all, her heart breaking for the depth of his guilt. "I'm sorry," he said suddenly, his voice clearer. She looked up to find him watching her with aware eyes. "You shouldn't be here. Should be on the stage." "Hush!" "No, listen." He struggled to sit up, fell back with a gasp. "I'm no good. Clara, everything I touch dies. Margaret, the baby. Now the ranch. You need to go, before I destroy you too." "You didn't destroy anything," Clara said firmly. "Bad things happened, terrible things, but you didn't cause them. You don't understand. That night, Margaret begged me to stay. Said she felt strange, scared, but the Millers—" He closed his eyes. "I chose wrong. Chose neighbors over my own wife. You chose to help people in desperate need. That's who you are, a man who helps others. She died alone." The words came out raw, torn from the deepest part of him. Died calling for me, and I wasn't there. Clara leaned forward. How do you know she called for you? Because I know her. Know she would have wanted me there at the end. Or maybe, Clara said gently, maybe she thought of you with love. Maybe she was grateful you were the kind of man who would help others. Maybe she died knowing she was loved. Truly and deeply loved. Tears ran down his weathered cheeks. I can't let her go. If I let her go, it's like she never existed. No. Clara wiped his tears with tender fingers. Letting go of the pain doesn't mean letting go of the love. The love stays. Always. He caught her hand, pressed it to his chest where his heart beat steadily despite everything. When you stood up to those people in town, when you defended her honor, I felt something I haven't felt in months. Hope. And it terrified me. Why? Because hoping means living. And living means maybe loving again. And I don't know if I can survive that kind of loss twice. Clara felt her own tears falling now. So you'll choose a different kind of death? A slow fade into nothing? That's not what Margaret would want. How can you know what she'd want? Because she loved you. And love, real love, wants the beloved to thrive, not just survive. They stayed like that through the long night, hands clasped, sharing pain and comfort in equal measure. When dawn came, Silas's fever had broken. Doc Harrison pronounced him on the mend, though weeks of recovery lay ahead. Tom Hartley and other neighbors had been to the ranch. He reported the damage was extensive. Barn gone, cattle scattered or stolen, fences destroyed. But the house stood intact. I'll help rebuild, Tom offered when he visited. We all will. That's what neighbors do. Silas, still weak but determined, insisted on returning home that afternoon. Clara drove the wagon carefully, aware of every bump that made him wince. When they crested the rise and saw the ranch, she heard his sharp intake of breath. The barn was indeed gone, just blackened timbers and ash. The garden Margaret had tended was trampled. The rosebush Silas had mentioned nothing but charred stems. It looked like a place where hope had died. We'll rebuild, Clara said quietly. Better than before. We? Silas looked at her. If you'll have me, not as a mail-order bride, not as a joke or a replacement, but as myself, Clara Whitmore, who can drive a wagon and mend leather and stand up to hypocrites, who's already half in love with a stubborn rancher who doesn't think he deserves love. Clara, I know you're not ready. I know you may never be ready. But I'm not afraid of your ghosts. Silas Boone. And I'm not afraid to wait. He was quiet for a long moment, looking at the devastation that had been his life. Then he reached over with his good hand and took hers. Margaret's rose bush, he said finally. The roots might have survived. Desert roses are hardy that way. With care, with time, it might bloom again. Yes, Clara agreed, understanding they were talking about more than roses. With care and time. They sat there as the sun set over the broken ranch. Two wounded souls choosing hope over despair. Choosing the hard work of healing over the easier path of giving up. It wouldn't be simple. Nothing in this hard country ever was. But Clara had found her place at last. Not as a replacement for what was lost, but as herself. Complicated and strong and exactly what this wounded land needed. Tomorrow they would start clearing the ashes. But tonight, they held hands and watched the stars come out over the desert. Infinite and eternal as love itself. 3 months had passed since the fire. Clara stood in the doorway of the new barn, watching the sun paint the mountains gold. Behind her, she could hear the sounds of a ranch coming back to life. Horses nickering, cattle lowing, the ring of hammer on anvil where Tom Hartley worked a temporary forge. She'd moved into the small foreman's cabin behind the main house, maintaining propriety while helping rebuild. The arrangement suited them both. Silas was healing, body and soul, but slowly. Some days were better than others. Miss Clara. Young Timothy Hartley came running, one of Ruth's boys who helped with chores. Reverend Wheeler's here to see you. Clara smoothed her apron and walked to the main house. where she found the minister on the porch with Silas. Both men looked grave. Miss Whitmore. Reverend Wheeler corrected himself. I've had a letter from Kansas City, from your family. Clara's stomach clenched. I have no family in Kansas City. Nevertheless, he handed her the letter. Your father is ill, dying. According to this, your mother asks you to come home. Clara stared at the familiar handwriting, memories flooding back. The father who'd cast her out, the mother who'd stood silent. She opened the letter with trembling fingers. My dear Clara, it began. Your father has taken ill with consumption. The doctors give him weeks at most. He speaks of you often in his delirium, calling for forgiveness. Please come home. We were wrong. So terribly wrong. Your loving mother, Ellen Whitmore. I need to go, Clara said quietly. Of course, Reverend Wheeler nodded. The eastbound stage? No. Silas spoke for the first time. I'll take her. The roads aren't safe for a woman traveling alone. Clara looked at him in surprise. Since his recovery, he'd been careful to maintain distance between them. Grateful for her help, but nothing more. That's a 2-week journey, she said. The ranch. Tom can manage. You need to see your father. 2 days later, they set out in the wagon, loaded with supplies for the journey. The November air was crisp, winter coming early to the high desert. Clara had protested the escort, but Silas was adamant. You stayed when I needed help, he said simply. Now it's my turn. The first days passed quietly. They made good time across the plains, camping under vast skies. Silas proved an able companion, setting up camp efficiently, cooking simple meals over the fire. In the evenings, they sat across from each other, conversation coming easier as the miles passed. Tell me about your father, he said one night as they camped by a stream. He was a good man once, kind, even, but reputation meant everything to him. When the scandal broke, Clara poked at the fire. He said I'd shamed the family name, that no decent man would have me. Maybe he was right. He was wrong. Silas's voice was firm. Any man would be lucky to have you. Their eyes met across the fire. Something had shifted between them on this journey, away from the ranch and its ghosts. Here, they were just two people under the stars. Silas. I dream about her less, he said suddenly. Margaret used to be every night. Now, sometimes I go days without dreaming of her. And when I wake up and remember she's gone, the pain is still there, but different, duller. Is that betrayal? That's healing. I talked to her grave before we left, told her about you, how you saved the ranch, saved me, how you make me want to try again. He looked up at the stars. Felt like she was listening, like she approved. Clara's heart ached with tenderness. She loved you. She'd want you happy. What I feel for you. He stopped, struggled for words. It's different from what I felt for her. Margaret was springtime, all sweetness and light. He smiled slightly. You're prairie fire, fierce and strong and impossible to ignore. Is that good? It's terrifying, he admitted, and wonderful. They reached Kansas City on a gray December morning. The familiar streets seemed smaller than Clara remembered, the grand houses less imposing. At her family's home, her mother answered the door, aging visible in new lines around her eyes. Clara. Tears streamed down Ellen Whitmore's face. Oh, my dear girl, you came. The reunion was awkward, painful. Her father lay in the same bed where Clara had once sat for stories, now wasted by disease. His eyes lit up when he saw her. Clara, my little girl, forgive me. Hush, Papa. She took his thin hand. I'm here. Over the next days, Clara sat with him, talking when he was lucid, holding his hand when he drifted. Silas took a room at a boarding house, but visited daily, his quiet presence a comfort. That your husband? Her father asked one afternoon, watching Silas help her mother with firewood. No, Papa, just a friend. Fool man if he's just a friend. Way he looks at you. Her father squeezed her hand weakly. Don't let pride cost you love. Clara, I did that. Cost me 3 years with my daughter. William Hartley visited, surprising Clara. He stood awkwardly in the parlor, his wife nowhere in sight. Clara, I heard you were back. I owe you an apology. It's done. William. No, please, let me say this. Catherine, my wife, she admitted the truth last month, about the lies. We've separated. He looked miserable. I was a coward. I should have trusted you, should have known you'd never— What do you want, William? Another chance. I know I don't deserve it, but— The lady said it's done. Silas appeared in the doorway, his presence filling the room. I think you should leave. William looked between them, understanding dawning. I see. I wish you happiness. Clara. After he left, Silas stood stiffly. I had no right to interfere. Yes, you did. Clara met his eyes. You had every right. Her father died that night, peacefully, with his family around him. Clara grieved, but it was clean grief, untainted by the anger that had poisoned the last years. At the funeral, she stood between her mother and Silas, drawing strength from both. Stay, her mother begged afterward. Your reputation is cleared, Catherine's lies exposed. You could rebuild your life here. Clara looked around the parlor where she'd once dreamed of a conventional life. Marriage to a banker or merchant, children, social calls, respectability. It all seems so small now. My life is in New Mexico, she said gently. My home, my work, my future. She glanced at Silas, who stood by the window, trying to give them privacy. Her mother followed her gaze. You love him? Yes, and he loves you. He's starting to, I hope. Her mother embraced her. Then go. Be happy. Be brave. Be everything I never had the courage to be. The return journey was different. The constraint between them had dissolved, replaced by something tender and new. They talked more freely, laughed occasionally, shared comfortable silences. On their last night before reaching Red Rock, camped by a stream they'd used on the outward journey, Silas took her hand. Your mother offered me money, to marry you proper, make an honest woman of you. Clara's cheeks burned. She didn't. She did. I told her I didn't need payment to marry you. He paused. If you'll have me. Silas, I know I'm not much of a prospect, a broken-down rancher with too many ghosts, but I love you. Clara Whitmore, not as a replacement for what I lost, but as yourself, fierce and loyal and brave enough to take on the whole town for a man who'd given you nothing but coldness. You gave me a home, Clara said softly. A purpose, a chance to be myself. Then let me give you more. Let me give you my name, my life. Whatever years God grants us. Margaret taught me how to love. You taught me how to live again. Will you marry me? Real and proper this time. Clara thought of the strange journey that had brought her here, the scandal, the advertisement, the cruel joke that became a blessing. Life rarely followed the path you expected. Yes, she said simply. Yes, I'll marry you. He kissed her then, under the vast western sky, beside the stream that had heard their first real conversation. It was sweet and tender and full of promise, not of a love replacing what was lost, but of a new love built on ashes and understanding, strong enough to weather whatever storms might come. When they reached Red Rock the next day, the whole town seemed to know already, perhaps from the way they sat close on the wagon seat, perhaps from the light in both their faces. Even Mrs. Pemberton could find nothing to criticize, though she tried. About time, was all Tom Hartley said, grinning. Ruth was more effusive. A Christmas wedding. Oh, Clara, how wonderful. As they drove out to the ranch, Clara saw it with new eyes, not as a place of exile or tragedy, but as home. The new barn stood strong against the winter sky. In the garden, green shoots pushed through the snow where she'd replanted, and by the house, protected by a small fence Silas had built, Margaret's rosebush showed tiny buds of new growth. "Welcome home," Silas said softly. "Yes," Clara agreed, her heart full. Home. Spring came early to Red Rock that year, melting the snow from the mountains and filling the arroyos with the rushing water. Clara stood in the garden, her hands deep in the dark soil, planting the seeds she'd ordered from back east. The rosebush nearby had survived the winter, its new growth promising blooms by summer. "You'll wear yourself out," Silas said from the porch, watching her with the soft expression she'd grown accustomed to since their wedding on Christmas Eve. "The almanac says to plant after the last frost," she replied, not looking up. "That's today." He came to kneel beside her, taking the seeds from her hands. "What are these?" "Hollyhocks. My grandmother grew them. They'll look pretty against the house." Together they planted the row, working in comfortable rhythm. These moments of simple domesticity still felt precious to Clara, still slightly miraculous. The wedding had been small, just close neighbors and Reverend Wheeler, but perfect in its simplicity. She wore her mother's wedding dress, altered to fit. Silas had worn his best suit, looking handsome despite his protestations. "Mrs. Boone," a voice called from the road. They looked up to see a wagon approaching, Ruth Hartley at the reins with a woman Clara didn't recognize beside her. "This is my cousin, Sarah Morrison," Ruth said after greetings were exchanged. "She's come to teach at the new school." Sarah was young, perhaps 20, with auburn hair and intelligent green eyes. She looked overwhelmed by the vastness of the landscape, clutching her carpet bag like a lifeline. "How wonderful," Clara said warmly. "You must stay for supper. Tell us about yourself." Over the meal, Sarah's story emerged. An educated woman from St. Louis. She'd come west seeking adventure and purpose. The school board had hired her to replace old Mr. Garrett, who'd decided to retire to California. "I've never seen such empty space," Sarah admitted, gazing out at the desert. "It's beautiful, but frightening. It grows on you." Clara assured her, "Where are you staying?" "The boarding house in town, though Mrs. Pemberton made it clear she doesn't approve of unmarried female teachers." Clara exchanged glances with Silas. "We have a spare room," she offered. "You'd be welcome here until you find something permanent." Sarah's gratitude was evident. Over the following days, she proved a pleasant addition to their household, helping with chores and bringing news from town. It was through her they learned that Jake Morrison had left Red Rock under mysterious circumstances, and that Thomas Ashford was organizing a proper library. One evening, as the women sat sewing while Silas worked on ledgers, Sarah asked quietly, "Ruth told me a little about Mr. Boone's first wife. It must be strange, living with those memories." Clara considered her words carefully. "Every marriage has its ghosts. Ours are just more visible than most. But don't you wonder if he compares—" "No." Clara's voice was gentle but firm. "Silas loved Margaret. He loves me. They're not the same love, and that's as it should be. I'm not trying to replace her or erase her. She's part of what made him who he is." Sarah shook her head in wonder. "I don't think I could be so generous. It's not generosity, it's practicality. I can't compete with a ghost, so I don't try. I'm building my own life here, my own love." Clara smiled. "Besides, Margaret gave me something precious. She taught him how to love well. I'm reaping the benefits of her teaching." Later that night, as Clara brushed her hair before bed, Silas came up behind her, meeting her eyes in the mirror. "I heard what you told Sarah about Margaret." Clara tensed slightly. They'd been happy these months, but Margaret's name could still bring shadows. "Did I speak out of turn?" "No." He took the brush from her hand, began running it through her long hair with careful strokes. "You spoke with grace, more than I deserve. Silas, I need to say this." He continued brushing, the rhythmic motions soothing. "When you first came here, I thought God was playing a cruel joke, sending me a bride on the anniversary of Margaret's death. But now I think maybe it wasn't cruel at all. Maybe it was mercy." "How so?" "You arrived on the day I was drowning in grief. the day I might have finally given up. But you wouldn't let me. You fought for me when I couldn't fight for myself." He set down the brush, turned her to face him. "Margaret saved me from loneliness. You saved me from despair. Both loves, both necessary." Clara felt tears prick her eyes. "I love you too. I want to show you something." He led her to the main room, to a drawer she'd never seen him open. Inside were papers, photographs, small mementos. "Margaret's things. I've been keeping them locked away, like keeping them hidden could keep the pain hidden too. But that's not right. She was part of this ranch, this life. Will you help me decide what to do with them?" They spent the next hour going through the items. Some things, jewelry, her wedding ring, Silas wrapped carefully to save for any daughters they might have. Others, photographs, her Bible, they placed on the mantel and bookshelf, integrating Margaret's memory into their living space rather than hiding it. "This feels right," Silas said finally. "Like she's properly honored now, not haunting." A week later brought unexpected drama. Clara was teaching Sarah to make tortillas when horses thundered into the yard. Sheriff Coleman, Pete's brother, dismounted with 2 deputies. "Mrs. Boone, is your husband here? He's in the north pasture. What's this about?" "Jake Morrison's been found dead. Shot. His partner says Silas threatened him after their fight." Clara's blood ran cold. "That was months ago. Silas has been here. I need to speak with him. Ma'am." When Silas arrived, his face was grim but unsurprised. "Heard you coming. Sheriff, also heard Jake was running with cattle thieves down near the border. Seems more likely they killed him than me." "Maybe so, but you publicly threatened him. I've got to ask, where were you 3 nights ago?" "Here, with my wife." The sheriff looked uncomfortable. "Anyone else can verify that?" "I can." Sarah stepped forward. "I live here. Mr. Boone was here all evening. We played cards until late." Sheriff Coleman relaxed visibly. "That's good enough for me. Sorry to trouble you. Silas, you understand I had to ask." After they left, Clara found herself shaking. The reminder of how quickly life could change, how easily happiness could be threatened, left her unsettled. "It's all right," Silas said, pulling her close. "Morrison made his choices. They caught up with him. But if Sarah hadn't been here, but she was, and I was here, where I belong. Not off chasing ghosts or revenge." He tilted her chin up. "I'm not that man anymore. Clara, the one who solved problems with his fists. You and this life we're building. That's what matters now." That evening brought better news. Thomas Ashford visited with papers for Silas to sign. The bank was extending credit for cattle purchases, viewing the ranch as a solid investment again. "You've done well," Ashford told them. "The ranch is thriving. The whole town's noticed. Even Abigail Pemberton admitted you've worked miracles out here." "Clara's done most of the work," Silas said. "I just try to keep up. Together," Clara corrected. "We've done it together." As spring deepened towards summer, the ranch flourished, the garden bloomed, the cattle multiplied, and Margaret's rosebush produced its first flowers, deep red blooms that filled the air with perfume. Clara cut one carefully, placing it in a vase on the kitchen table. "It's beautiful," Sarah said, then caught herself. "Is it all right that I—" "Of course," Clara assured her. "Beauty is meant to be shared." That night, as Clara and Silas sat on the porch watching the sunset, he took her hand. "I've been thinking about what Ashford said, about the town noticing our success. When you first came here, they all watched to see you fail, to see us fail. But we didn't. No, we didn't." He brought her hand to his lips. "We proved them wrong, proved that something good could grow from ashes." Speaking of growing, Clara took a breath. "Silas, I have something to tell you." He looked at her, and she saw the hope dawn in his eyes before she even spoke. "Really?" he whispered. "Really. The doctor confirmed it yesterday. By Christmas, we'll have a baby." He pulled her into his arms, holding her like she was made of spun glass. against her hair. She heard him murmur a prayer of thanks. "Are you happy?" she asked, though she could feel her answer in the way he trembled. "Happy doesn't begin to cover it," he said roughly. "Terrified, grateful, overwhelmed." He pulled back to look at her. "I failed to protect Margaret and our child. What if you didn't fail anyone?" Clara said firmly. "And you won't fail us. We're strong. This baby and I, we're desert roses, hardy stock." He laughed, the sound mixing with tears. "Desert roses. Yes, you are." As stars began to appear in the darkening sky, they sat together, hands intertwined over the promise of new life. The ranch spread out before them, rebuilt, renewed, ready for the future. In the garden, night-blooming flowers opened their faces to the moon, and somewhere in the desert, a mockingbird began its evening song. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. There would be droughts and storms, troubles and triumphs. But tonight, they had this, each other, their hard-won peace, and the promise of a child who would know only love, never the shadows that had once darkened these walls. "I love you, Clara Boone," Silas said into the darkness. "And I love you," she replied, "forever and always." The desert wind carried their words away, out over the vast land that had tested them, broken them, and ultimately brought them together, and in the garden. Margaret's rosebush bloomed on, a testament to the persistence of beauty, the resilience of love, and the possibility of second chances in even the hardest ground. December snow dusted the mountains like sugar, but the valley remained clear and cold under a brilliant blue sky. Clara moved carefully through the house, her body heavy with child, preparing for the Christmas celebration. The parlor smelled of pine and cinnamon, decorated with branches Sarah had helped gather. "You should be resting," Silas said for the third time that morning, watching her arrange holly on the mantel. "I've been resting for weeks. Today is special." She turned to him, radiant despite her exhaustion. "Our first Christmas as a family, our last Christmas as just the two of us." He crossed to her, hands settling gently on her rounded belly. "How's our little one today?" "Active. I think he's eager to join us." "She," Silas corrected with a smile. "I'm certain it's a girl, with your spirit and stubbornness." "Heaven help us then." Clara laughed. The house was full of preparations. Ruth Hartley had promised to bring pies, Sarah was managing the turkey, and even Thomas Ashford had accepted their invitation. It would be a proper celebration, the kind of gathering that made a house truly feel like a home. As Clara settled into her rocking chair to rest, Silas brought her a cup of tea. "I have something for you, an early Christmas gift." He handed her a small wrapped package. Inside, she found a silver locket on a delicate chain. She opened it to find two tiny photographs, one of her, taken just last month, and one of Margaret from years before. "Silas," she breathed. "The jeweler in Santa Fe did the work. I thought it was time to honor both parts of our story." "You were right. That day you told Sarah about not competing with ghosts. This family, this life, it's built on all of it. The joy and the sorrow, the past and the present." Clara's eyes filled with tears. "It's perfect. Help me put it on." As he fastened the chain around her neck, his fingers lingered on her skin. "You gave me back my life. Clara, I want our child to know that, to know the whole story of how love can persist through loss, how hope can grow from ashes." "They will," Clara promised. "We'll tell them everything. About Margaret, about the fire, about how a mail-order bride arrived on the worst possible day, and it became the best thing that could have happened." That afternoon, the guests began arriving, the house filled with warmth and laughter, children's voices mixing with adult conversation. Clara watched from her chair, occasionally rising to hostess despite protests, taking in the scene with deep satisfaction. Sarah had bloomed in her months at the ranch, no longer the frightened city girl. She'd moved to a small house in town, but remained a frequent visitor. Now she helped Ruth manage the children while discussing lesson plans for the new term. "The school board wants to expand," Sarah told them over dinner. "Add another room, Hire a second teacher. The town's growing." "It's true," Ashford confirmed. "The railroad's considering a spur line through the valley. If it happens, Red Rock will transform overnight." "Progress," Silas said neutrally. He'd learned to appreciate some changes, but remained wary of too much civilization encroaching on their hard-won peace. After dinner, as the women cleared dishes and the men smoked on the porch, young Timothy Hartley approached Clara shyly. "Mrs. Boone, Ma says you're going to have a baby soon." "That's right, Timothy. Will it be born on Christmas like Jesus?" Clara smiled. "I don't think so, but soon after." "That's good. Jesus should have his day special." The innocent wisdom of children never ceased to amaze her. She ruffled his hair affectionately, then winced as a sharp pain crossed her belly. "Clara?" Ruth noticed immediately. "Are you all right?" I think perhaps the baby has other ideas about timing." The next hours passed in a blur. Doc Harrison was summoned. The guests dispersed with excited whispers, and Clara found herself in the bedroom where Margaret had once slept, bringing new life into the world. Labor was long and difficult. Through the pain, she heard Silas pacing outside, heard his voice raised in occasional frustration when the doctor wouldn't let him enter. "Let him in," Clara gasped between contractions. "I need him." Silas burst through the door, face white with fear. "Clara, I'm all right. We're all right." She gripped his hand. "Don't leave me. Never," he promised fiercely. As Christmas Eve became Christmas Day, as the first light of dawn painted the mountains pink and gold, Margaret Rose Boone entered the world with a cry that seemed to shake the rafters. "A girl," Doc Harrison announced, placing the baby in Clara's exhausted arms. "A healthy, perfect girl." Clara looked down at her daughter through tears of joy. The baby had Silas's dark hair, but Clara's stubborn chin, already visible in her tiny face. "Margaret Rose," Silas whispered, touching the baby's cheek with one trembling finger. "For both her mothers." "You don't mind?" Clara asked. "The name. It's perfect. She'll carry both stories forward, the love that was and the love that is." As the sun rose fully, bathing the room in warm light, they sat together, a family complete. Outside, church bells began to ring, celebrating Christmas morning. But inside the Boone Ranch, they celebrated their own miracle. Ruth and Sarah visited that afternoon, cooing over the baby, bringing food and good wishes. Even Mrs. Pemberton sent a beautiful blanket she'd knitted herself, perhaps finally accepting that Clara Boone was here to stay. "She's beautiful," Sarah said softly, holding little Margaret Rose. "You're so blessed." "We are," Clara agreed, watching Silas hover protectively nearby. "Blessed beyond measure." That evening, as snow began to fall softly outside, Clara nursed the baby while Silas read aloud from the Bible, the Christmas story, as appropriate for a child born on such a day. The house was quiet, peaceful, filled with the kind of contentment that comes from struggles overcome and love hard won. "What are you thinking?" Silas asked, setting the Bible aside. "About the journey, how I came here as a joke, unwanted and lost, how you were drowning in grief, and now look at us." She gestured to the room. "The baby, their life together. If someone had told me that first day this is where we'd end up, you'd have gotten right back on that stage." He finished with a slight smile. "Maybe, or maybe I'd have recognized even then that sometimes the hardest roads lead to the most beautiful destinations." Silas moved to sit beside them, his arm around Clara, his finger stroking the baby's soft cheek. "Do you know what Margaret told me once? She said the desert only looks empty to those who don't know how to see. That life here is hidden, protected, but all the stronger for surviving such harsh conditions." She was wise. She was, and I think she'd be happy to see what's grown here. A new family, a new chance, her roses still blooming by the door. He kissed Clara's temple. "Thank you for seeing past the emptiness, for helping life take root again." "We helped each other," Clara corrected. "That's what love does. It helps us become more than we could be alone. As the baby slept between them, they sat in comfortable silence, watching the snow fall. Tomorrow would bring the challenges of new parenthood, the ongoing work of the ranch, the continued building of their life together. There would be difficult times ahead, droughts and storms, sickness and health, all the trials that test any marriage. But tonight, on this holy night that had brought them their own miracle, they were simply grateful, grateful for second chances, for love that could bloom in unlikely soil, for the mail-order bride who'd arrived at the worst possible moment and transformed it into the beginning of everything good. Through the window, they could see the rose bush, dormant now but waiting for spring. Like everything in this hard country, it knew how to endure, how to wait, how to bloom again when the time was right. "Merry Christmas, my love," Silas whispered. "Merry Christmas," Clara replied, her heart too full for more words. And in her arms, Margaret Rose Boone slept peacefully, the living promise that love could indeed conquer loss, that joy could grow from sorrow, and that sometimes the very thing that seems like an ending is actually the most beautiful beginning of all. The desert wind sang softly around the house, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote called to its mate, not lonely this time, but triumphant, a song of survival and hope in a land that demanded both. Clara smiled, recognizing herself in that call. She'd found her mate, her home, her purpose. "If those folks who sent me here as a joke could see us now," she murmured, "they'd realize they gave us the greatest gift," Silas finished. "Each other." And so, as snow covered the desert in a blanket of white, as Christmas Day 1884 drew to a close, the Boone family began their story proper, not a tale of replacement or forgetting, but of building anew while honoring what came before, a story of wild hearts finding home in the most unexpected places, and love proving stronger than all the forces that would tear it apart. In the end, Clara thought as sleep finally claimed her, that's all anyone could ask for. A love true enough to weather any storm, a home strong enough to shelter dreams, and a future bright with promise as a desert dawn. Thank you all for listening to this story of love and redemption in the Old West. I'd love to hear where you're listening from. Please share in the comments below so we can connect with fellow Western romance enthusiasts from around the world. If you enjoyed Clara and Silas's journey, please subscribe to Wild West Campfire for more tales of frontier love and adventure. Share your thoughts on their story. Did you have a favorite moment? Let us know in the comments.